So in this section, what we're going to do is handle sign-in failure, and then in the next section, we'll handle an actual success. So just to review the way this works, let's look at our little console session. So my second tab here is a console. The params hash in this case is going to look something like this. Session is, it's actually going to use strings instead of symbols, but that's okay because inside of Rails it does the conversion automatically. It's going to be email, and then password. So this is essentially what the params hash will be when we submit it. And so let's take a look at our controller. So in the create action here, we somehow need to handle that submission by authenticating the user based on the submitted email password combination. And now I've just given you a big hint about how we're going to do this. You may recall from a couple lessons ago that when we implemented the password machinery in the user model, we made a class method called authenticate. Just to recall, that we actually wanted this partially so that we could write a good test. Let's look at authenticate. Here it is. And so here's what the authenticate method should do. It should exist, which it does. It should return nil on email password mismatch. It should return nil for an email address with no user, and it should return the user on email password match. So what that means is that inside of this sessions controller, we can find the user, which we can just call user. As we'll see, we actually don't need an instance variable in this case. And then we can use the class method user.authenticate and pass it, remember what it accepts as parameters, pass it the email and the submitted password. And so in this case, the email is in the params hash under session, and then email. And then to get the password, we do params session password. And now based on the return value, we can take the appropriate action. So let's go down here and say if, well, what happens if this is invalid? It's in that case, in the case of a failed sign-in, the user is nil. So we can say if user.nil, then do something. In fact, render new is the right thing to do. Else, we're going to do something else. Let's say handle successful sign-in here. And if the user is nil, what we want to do is render the new page and indicate some error message. So let's comment this out because we're going to write a test for it. Let's get rid of these guys. We actually don't need this. So let's take a look at this. Say it should have the right title, and now we want a new describe block. What are we doing here? In terms of get new, now we're doing post create. This is an analogy with the same thing in the user's controller spec, so let's just remind ourselves how we did that. So the user's controller spec has to get new, post create, and so on. And so in this case, we're going to follow the same basic model. We're going to say post create describe failure. So let's do that. So what should it do? Well, we know it should re-render the new page. So let's do that. Let's do post. And now we have to think about how are we going to submit this data. Well, remember in the case of the user's controller, we built up an attributes hash that had valid or invalid user data. In this case, we want, instead of name, email, password, password confirmation, we just want email and password. So let's put it into before each block. And so this is a failed sign-in, so let's do this. Let's do email and password, or both just empty. Now, you may wonder, like, why don't we test the different failure modes? Because you can have a failure because there is no such email in the database. You can also have a failure where there's a password mismatch. And the reason we don't do that here is because we've already tested that in the user layer. In other words, the model spec, the user spec, already tests for all of those cases, so we don't have to test it again here. And it really simplifies the controller test to be able to ignore that detail by pushing it to another place. So now we're going to post, and instead of over here where we did user with the attributes, now in this case it's a session. And so I just saved it, and we should get a failure. Okay, so it's really failing. And that's simply because we haven't actually posted to the right thing. We want to post to the create action. Nope, still not working. Oh, we don't need this comma here. Dar. I'm going to leave that in just to show you that, in fact, I can do things that stupid. Okay, so that's good. Now we're red, which is right. Just hit here. Yeah. So we're red because it's not finding the session's create template. And then we can go here and just uncomment this to get green. There we go. Now, what else do we want, though? We want to handle the error somehow. So instead of having that block of error messages, as in the case of the users, which was in error messages, this error message is partial. Here, where it's using the @user variable, it's using @user here. We don't have an @session. There's no notion of an @session variable. But what we can do is put an error in the flash. So let's try that. Now I'm actually going to do the implementation here because writing the test is a little tricky and actually requires that we know where we're going. But since this is a tutorial, I'm not going to assume that you know that. Naively, you might just say flash. Well, let's take a look at the user's controller again. Remember what we did with the flash on a successful signup. We have this flash notice here, or flash success. Welcome to the sample app, and we originally did that by doing flash of success, and that was equal to the message. So let's try that again. Let's do flash, and this, instead of success, this is an error. So let's say flash error equals invalid email password combination. And I'm going to save this, and let's take a look at what it does. So here's the sign-in page, and now if we submit, it should give us this error message. And it looks like it's working, and the reason I want to show you this is because this is quite subtle, because now if I click on another page, look at that. It's still there. Now that is not what we want. The whole point of the flash is that it should disappear. And the reason that it doesn't work is because it persists for one request. So in the case of the user's controller, what we do is we redirect to the user profile page, and then it hits the user profile page and puts in the flash. And then if you access another page or you refresh the page, the flash goes away. In this case, though, instead of redirecting, we're actually rendering the new page, which doesn't count as a new request. And so what happens is the first time we hit it, let's go to /signin, it's rendering the flash because it is defined. Remember, it's the layout that's doing it. It's this line here, or these three lines here, that are putting the flash into the page. But then when we click on another link, this counts as the first request after the render, and so it's still rendering the flash. Now, so the reason that I mention this is because there's a trick for getting this to work. There's this very special version of the flash called flash.now. That is to say, right now there's an error and only persisted for this request. So let's take a look at this. Now if I submit invalid data and click to a different link, it goes away. So that's what's required. Notice, by the way, that we have nice styling here. This is also care of Blueprint. Our success flash was in a nice green box, and now it's in red for an error. Let's take a look at this. So I'm going to comment this out and write a test. So let's take a look at sessions controller spec. On failure, it should have an error message. So let's say post create the right session or I guess the wrong session attributes, so for an invalid sign in. And then I'm going to say flash dot now of error dot should match. We'll just use our regular expression matching, and I'm just going to say that it should say that something's invalid, and it's going to be case insensitive. By the way, I just realized we'd never tested for this. Response dot should be success. Actually, no, we want to render the template. Let's say it renders the new template. Okay, so now we've got our test. Let's see if we're green. We shouldn't be green. We should be red because we commented out that flash line. So now let's say flash.now of error. There we go. So now we're green. And there's one more thing I want to do, which is I want to say that if we submit this thing, that it should still say sign in in the title. Right now it's just the base title. And it's nice to have that base title there in case we forget to do this. But let's put it in here. Let's say it should have right title. Remember, this is have selector, title, sign in, content. So we've come pretty far in a short time. We've already got our new sessions page working at /signin, and we can even handle an invalid submission. But as you might guess, there's quite a bit more to do in this lesson, and it's all going into this branch. So not only is most of the work going into the create action, but it's really all going into the handle successful sign-in part of this if-else branch. So we're going to get to that next. Let's quick make a commit before we do that. Let's just double check that we're green. Good. Should probably do that before making the commit, but we could always amend it if we needed to.